All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201. That's client-side scripting in the winter 2022 semester at Durham, and it's week 4, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And so a couple things that are going to happen this week. One is we're going to meet in person on Friday, so that's looking good for us to meet. Most people have reported so far today that it's not so bad. They've gotten to class and they've been able to navigate all that, and it's okay. So it's not so terrible, which is a good thing. The other thing I want to talk about is we're going to do a bit of admin first in the first part of our lecture today, and then we'll hit a little bit of jQuery near the end, which is what this lesson is all about. So let's talk about what we did last week. Last week we hit JavaScript. We did a kind of a history of JavaScript a little bit, the evolution. We talked about how it changed, how ECMAScript is the underlying, protocol for JavaScript in many ways. It's kind of a conventions and standards. We have two main versions of ECMAScript that we were talking about, ECMAScript 5 and ECMAScript 6 and beyond. ECMAScript 5 was the JavaScript version that was introduced prior to 2015. ECMAScript 6, which is also known as ECMAScript 2015, 2016, 2017, and so on, all the way up to now, 2021, which is the last version, are all the latest versions of JavaScript, and it continues to evolve every year. We have the standards committee look at that and make changes to ECMAScript pretty much mid-year. We also described the differences between how we look at classes in ECMAScript 5 and ECMAScript 6 and what the difference is there. So we looked at those things as well. We split one file over, kind of our class over 2 files. So split code over multiple files. We did that. And we used local storage to store contacts that we created in our contact class. And we pulled them up in a contact list page in a way that we kind of created a pseudo database or a pseudo library. It's not really a database or a library, but it's kind of like mock data that we're using so we can see what it would look like if we actually had access to a database in a contact list. That's what we kind of were doing last week. We also learned about the use strict directive, which takes away the ability, without throwing an error, for you to assign a value to a variable that has not been declared, which you can do if you don't implement the use strict directive. So that's what we talked about last week. In a nutshell, for the most part, that's what we did. We did in-class exercise 3. And what are we doing this week? This week, we're going to talk about what jQuery is. We're going to talk about jQuery features, the CDN. What is that? Basics of jQuery programming. We've kind of talked about the CDN before, by the by. This thing has been talked about. jQuery animations in effect are in this document, but we're not going to really talk about too much about it. We will talk about jQuery DOM traversal. But again, jQuery form validation and animations and AJAX, that's in this document for reference, but it's not something that we're going to be doing today. We're going to break it down over a couple weeks as per our schedule. One thing to note is that Lab 1, which was originally slated to be delivered for this Friday, the due date has moved to Sunday. And the reason for this is, well, there's twofold. One, your in-class exercise 4 is also due Friday, would have also been due Friday, right? And the other thing is we're also meeting in person for the first time on Friday, and I feel that there might just be, just with everything that's changed over the last week or so, this week coming up, it probably would be a lot of load for you to try and get everything done for Friday. So I've kind of, for those reasons combined, I've kind of moved the due date for both Lab 1 and Lab 2 to Sundays. So starting with Lab 1, it's this Sunday at midnight. The due date has changed. The document might still say Friday, but don't worry about that. The due date online says Sunday. And I'm also going to be talking about Lab 2 today and how that the due date for that has also been changed to Sunday to give you more chance to work on it. All right, so that's how that's morphed or changed. Let's look at our schedule before we get into stuff. I want to talk about Lab 2 a little bit, and even a little bit of Lab 1, just to go over the requirements one more time. So again, this week, it's Intro to jQuery. Next week, we're going to be talking about form validation with JavaScript in jQuery, which is part of your Lab 2. Intro to Ajax is happening in week 6, which is very interesting. And you have a second test. You guys did very well on the first test for the most part. And so the second test, which is a little quiz again, same format, is going to be week 6, so a couple weeks from now. And then in week 7, same week as Family Day, where you will probably miss a day because you might have classes on Monday. We're going to be talking about how to create a single page application. After the reading week break, we'll get into talking about TypeScript for the remainder of the semester. We'll be using TypeScript for the most part. So that's kind of, again, just an up-to-date schedule of where we're at. And we'll move on from there. So before we get into the meat and bones of what we're talking about today, let's talk about Lab 2 first, and then I'll come back to Lab 1. Let's go to Lab 2. So Lab 2, again, it's due week 7, Sunday, February the 27th, 2022 at midnight. Sounds like it's far away, but actually not that far, believe it or not. 15% of your final grade, just like Lab 1. From a difficulty perspective, when we looked at Lab 1, I talked about how Lab 1 should be pretty much straightforward. No issues. You should be able to get it done, and so on. And I kind of rate Lab 1 at a 1 or 2 difficulty out of 10, okay, when it comes to the stuff that we've talked about. But when it comes to Lab 2, we're climbing the ladder of challenge now. We're starting to climb the ladder, or going up the ramp, if you will. And so we're kind of at the bottom rung. We're kind of moving up a little bit. And this one would be more of a 3 or 4 when it comes to challenge, all right, for this particular lab coming up. So why is it more? Well, you're going to see. One part is your project setup. So your project setup, you're going to create 2 additional files, a login and a register file, and that's okay. But I want them to look like this. So I'm going to give you examples in our lab next week, or in class exercise, how to do that. So, I mean, yeah, these are free marks for sure. As long as you follow along and add these in, you're good to go. So this is where the free marks come in. I try and give you something throughout the entire time. So that's like 10 marks for free. So the page structure, again, you're not really having to do a lot to make this look just like this. But in terms of functionality, that's where we get, we're going to work on making these things functional. So login and register pages are the way they are. Next part is the validation in jQuery with JavaScript and jQuery is 65 marks out of 100. So now that is where the meat and bones comes from for this lab, right? So your login page, register page have different functionality. We're going to go into more details about what I'm going to ask you guys to do. But for the most part, you're going to make a user class. And the user class, what you're going to do is you're going to register the user, as an example, with the register page. It's going to create a user object, and from that, you're going to be able to check to see if the user object is in memory. And then we can use, again, either local storage or session storage to check that out. And what you're going to do is, if you're logged in, you're going to modify the nav bar to show that you have logged in. Between the login or logout link, what we're going to show is in the nav bar the name of the user that's been logged in, or the display name, if you will. So that's what's going to happen. So it's just after the contact us and before the login logout link, which we're going to talk about. So login logout, before we get there, I'm going to modify our starter so it looks like we're going to be ready to go with that. So we're going to have a login logout link. And the login logout link, when you have that link and it says log in, it'll take you to the login page. When you're logged in, it'll show log out. That's what's going to happen. It's going to change depending on if you're logged in or logged out. Again, using only JavaScript and jQuery, you're going to have an error message field where if you have a problem with validation for your register page, it's going to pop up and say, hey, there's something wrong. You haven't entered the right information, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's what's going to happen there. And that's what these parts are. It's going to talk about the different fields. I'm also asking you to use things like, maybe some validation for each of the fields in the register page. And finally, what you're going to be doing is outputting, the user class to the console when you log in for the first time. That's what it's going to do. So for the most part, that's where the functionality is going to be. It's not full login and register right now. All I'm getting you guys to do is just prepare some of that and put together the user class, which is really super important. It kind of dovetails nicely with the stuff we've done this week, what we're going to do this week and last week, where we create a class and we use things like local storage and so on to make things go. All right, internal documentation is part of Lab 2. So please make sure, just like Lab 1, that you put your name, student ID for you and for your partner. You will have an additional partner or another partner there. GitHub is required, as well as making your site live. This is normal. And a short video. And remember that there is a, we like to call this a single slide or a title card. That's what I want you to think about this, a title card in your video that includes images of you and your partner. This could be a PowerPoint slide, or if you don't like PowerPoint, you could make it a Word document, or you can make it an image if you really care to do that manipulation. But it has to include images, current images of you and your partner, your names, your student IDs, and the name of the lab, which would be Lab 1 for the course, so course particulars. Then the other thing is you're going to demonstrate your program's functionality. You'll show your program working properly, not on the console, but working. And your partner will describe the code, right? You and your partner. And I said you or your partner because I'm going to give you the option, just like in Lab 1, for either of you to discuss your code. Okay, so that's important to know how to do. Also, please make sure that your video has sound. No sound means no video. No video means no marks, just like last time. And this one should be around 5 minutes. Again, you don't have to make it very, very long. You're just going to zip through it, show me that it's working, and then see you later. I do prefer YouTube. Some people have submitted MP4s at this stage. Now that you should be mostly back in Canada, you should all have access to YouTube. What I recommend is make an unlisted YouTube video, and I want you to submit the YouTube link separate, the GitHub link separate, the live site separate, and then finally your zip archive of your project files. I don't want you to put everything in an archive, like a zip archive or a RAR. Definitely not RAR, but please don't put all of those things, embed them nicely into a zip archive. It's not going to help me. Individual files and links are best because I can go on DC Connect and click on each of those links and quickly mark your stuff, and you'll get really good feedback, as opposed to me having to download everything. It doesn't matter if you're working in Teams or not. It's an extra step that's not required. Please don't do that. And that goes the same for your in-class exercises as well as for Lab 1. So that's Lab 2. But let's go back to Lab 1 for a second. I know you're going to have more questions surrounding Lab 2 when we get there. I've posted the details just in case you want to start moving on it, right? So that way you can get going on Lab 2. Let's talk about Lab 1 briefly. So remember Lab 1? Yeah, that's due. It's coming up, and it's due on Sunday. And hopefully you guys have started this one already. So Lab 1, there is this section where people ask the question where I've got this section A for the site structure. You show a products.html page here, yes. But inside of here, you say that you want us to change the products.html to projects. Do you mean you want me to change the product.html page so it's renamed? That means you're talking about changing this right here so it reads projects, the actual site structure. And do you want me to do this programmatically, Tom? The answer is you can't. There's no way of doing that programmatically. There's no way of changing the name of your file programmatically using JavaScript alone. Okay, it's not possible properly. All right, you can make use of any kind of using front end or client side scripting to do any kind of saving or loading, right? Without Ajax, loading is okay, but saving impossible. You can't save to your to your local files, and it's because of security concerns. Imagine if like you can inject code to some person's website and change their content of their directory. Yeah, no, that would be crazy, right? So and why would this even work more than once? Once you've gone in here and you've changed it, Why would you try and target it and change it again? So that doesn't make any sense. So that's not what I'm asking. I don't want you to change the name of the file. It should be products.html. However, in the nav bar, right? So that's the nav bar that we see today, right? So if I was going to pull up our VS Code just for a second, and let me just do that. And notice our current lab. Some people have asked, what about the lab? What would you recommend as a starter? You know, kind of stuff. Should I start with lab or in-class exercise 1, 2, 3? Which one should I start with? Kind of things. Let's go with localhost 3000. And notice that the top of our page right now says home, products, services, about us, and contact us. What I'm looking for is for you to change the thing that says products up here. This is for the one that I did right. By the way, one of the sections, I by accident, I changed it to projects starting off, right? So let's talk about this in a second. So here we can see that it says products, but what I'm looking for lab 1 is for you to change the link name from products to projects. Make sure that you change this so that it doesn't show like this in your lab. And you're doing this programmatically, not physically. So you're not going to go through every single site to do that. You're going to change it programmatically, which means with JavaScript. Okay, that's the kind of stuff I'm asking for. So that should answer some of your questions. And let's just make sure I'm gonna try and answer all of them today. Is using Bootstrap examples okay? It absolutely is. You can use the Bootstrap examples we have in our in-class exercises every single time. We talked about the file name of products. Keep it as products. Don't change it to projects. And I recommend probably for, we've done a lot with in-class exercise 3 because we added a kind of a contact list that looks like this, right? Something like this. This is probably completely unnecessary as a starter for your lab 1. I recommend go back to in-class exercise 2 as a starter. That's probably a good place to start because it has most of the stuff that you need up here to get going. Your content is ready to go and it's not so bad. But why would you include extra stuff when you don't need it? I don't recommend you include all the extra stuff that you don't need. All right, so in-class exercise 3 would be okay, but not optimal. In-class exercise 2, that's ICE 2, probably a better place to start. All right, so on that then, what about other stuff? What about the other pieces? So we've got our folder structure, and we also talked about using jQuery and Bootstrap and Font Awesome. For the most part, you're getting paid for this, and you got it all for free from in-class exercise 2 and up, right? And but this piece here is your responsibility, all right? So this piece here is you have to construct content that's body copy as well as images. Get them, acquire them or create them, and inject them into your page. Now, here's the thing: people have asked, do I inject the images too? No, leave the images hard-coded in your HTML pages. Okay, the only thing you're injecting for this exercise is your body copy, which means all the text on all of the pages. And it says so right here in your number 3, which is all the text body copy for your site content above should be injected, but not the images. Please hard code the images. The exercise is if you put the images in a certain spot, you should be able to inject the content of your pages, the body copy, the text of your pages, wherever you need to, whether it's above, below, beside the images, wherever they're going to be. But the images are actually already there. Okay, so that's what you're going to do with this. Now, this is worth 20 marks, which means you need to kind of either invent something or get something about you and your partner to put in here. So what I'm looking for is at least 3 of your favorite projects. Between you and your partner, you can have 3. If you want to say 4, that's okay, right? Let's say 2 for each of you, right? And the projects could be something that you've already worked on. Like I said, something that you're working on today, or maybe something that's a personal project that you're working on, or something that you've worked on before that you're proud of. It's like a mini portfolio site for you and your partner combined, almost like a team, right? What do you people offer together? What do you and your partner offer, right? Do you offer services such as C++ or C# programming, those kind of things? Add some text and images that, that make this page look nice. The About Us page should be details, text, and current images about you and your partner. So a little bio, and also links to your resumes are required for this one. So again, this whole thing is worth 20 marks. That's 20% of your code of your lab one. Please do not discount this thing and just put in random stuff or things that look bad, because you will be judged on how nicely this looks as well. Some aesthetics are required for this part. Okay, just letting you know. All right, simple DOM manipulation. This is where we talked about all the text being swapped out, and products link found in the nav bar will be swapped to projects programmatically. You'll change that name, easy, easy. Then this part is where people don't know what to do. They're like, wait a minute, what? I'm going to make a new human resources link and I'm going to inject it between About Us and Contact Us. How do I do that? Remember, hints. Here's some hints for this one. If you don't know what to do, remember that your nav bar is a bunch of links, so list items, inside of a unordered list. So you have an unordered list container, parent node, with a bunch of list items inside of it, right? And so what you want to do is you want to inject a new list item, fully configured, as an example, between the About Us and Contact Us list items. That's what you want. Now, here's something also that I got asked before. Does the human resources link have to work? This is new. Did I say that there's a human resources link here? The answer is no. So I haven't said that it's supposed to go anywhere. So for now, just insert a link that doesn't do anything, right? I got to talk about this because people are like, should I include a human resources page? And the answer is no. Please don't do that. There was no call for that. Just put in human resources as a link. It should show up programmatically on every page because it's going to be done through JavaScript anyway. So because every page has an app.js attached to it, then human resources should appear in all the pages, but it doesn't do anything because there's no human resources actual page right now. And don't, link to some page that doesn't exist. That's not required. Okay, so just leave it as hashtag for the anchor tag there for your href. Okay, so that doesn't have to do anything. And that's what something I was asked. Again, that maybe we can revise this assignment at a future date and then add some additional challenge. For now, I'm not going to. Using only JavaScript, this is the last part. Add another nav bar at the bottom of the page that is a fixed bottom nav bar, and I talked about what that looks like. It should look something like this with the proper date, please. Okay. And that is the DOM manipulation part, which is 30 marks, and the content part, which is you create and add images and body content and all that kind of stuff. That's 50 marks total, half of your assignment. The other 15 marks for any kind of functionality is the contact form itself. There's two parts here that you haven't quite done exactly the same. So the first part is, hey, add some your form. We've done that. You got these 5 marks because we did that last week. So some part of it, and this is going back to what I was asked, Cooper, you asked about, should I use, ICE 3 or ICE 2, or what should I use? Well, this is where you can probably steal the contact form from ICE 3 and put it here because I'm asking for it, right? So that's when you can kind of, get some of that. But these two parts, I've covered some of it, and this is one part that I have covered, but let's see if you guys can figure it out. When the user clicks on the submit button, the form will output the user's information to the console. What happens when I click the submit button, guys? If I click the submit button, what happens right now by default? What's the default behavior?
Doesn't the form reset or something like the page reset?
The page resets, the form resets. So that's not what we want. We need to prevent default behavior in this form by not allowing this to happen. So that's the way we can output the user's information to the console. By the way, there's no mention of the user, the contact class here. I didn't say make a contact class and blah, blah, blah. Didn't do that, all right? Could you? Yes. Would I be mad about it? No. I mean, if that's what you wanted to do, that's okay with me. And then here's the next part that we haven't covered. I mean, we've covered 95% of it, right? So clicking the submit button will start a timer. Okay. After 3 seconds, the user will be redirected back to the home page. We haven't covered how to do this. Exactly, right? So let's talk about it. So I'll give you how you do it, right? This is how you do it, guys. So if we go back here, and if I was to look at some documentation, if I was going to do a search, then I would, if I search for how do I do it, right? How do I do a timer in JavaScript? Then it would take you to something like this page, right? Which is w3schools.com jstiming.asp. Let's put that in your link. There we go. Hint, hint for those people that are here. I'll also put it up on for the people that are watching live on YouTube. I'll put that in there as well. So that little link basically says everything that you need. So you want to use something called window.setTimeout. The setTimeout function is built into the window object, and you can call a function after a number of milliseconds have elapsed. Okay, which means that for 3 seconds, you have to wait 3,000 milliseconds. You put 3,000 in there. So set timeout, do a function after 3,000 milliseconds. What function will you do? Location.href is equal to home or index.html. That's it. That's what that function is going to be inside there. Now, here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to do set interval. Set interval is like set timeout, but it keeps on triggering every 3,000 milliseconds. So it's almost like a repeatable trigger that keeps going off, almost like alarm that keeps going off every 3 seconds. This is great if you're doing something like an actual timer that you want to run every second. You want to do a countdown timer every second, then you would change this to 1,000 milliseconds and just keep running that every second to do some function. It will be repeating that function. It'll keep calling that function over and over again. Again, we don't need you to do this one. We need you to do this one. Okay, that's the way to do it. Okay, so that's the solution. And again, it's window.setTimeout, which is what we want to do. And there's some great examples here here inside of W3 Schools. Here's an example of that, right? Set timeout, function. My function is this function you're going to call after 3,000 milliseconds, which is 3 seconds. Okay, that's what it's going to do. All right, and that covers the part that we didn't cover together in Lab 1, which is right here in the contact form. All right, so right here, I'm asking you to, after 3 seconds, the user will be redirected to the home page. And one last note is the form does not have to be fully functional. So in other words, the form doesn't have to work or send information to some backend server. It's not required. Okay, that is 15 marks as an example out of your 15% out of your 100 for Lab 1. Please make sure you don't discount this. This is pretty hefty. Other stuff are until documentation we've talked about before in Lab 2, GitHub. We've been doing GitHub. One of your partners should have the main repository, and the other person should collaborate with them. Only one repository will be required. And your live site, when you do that, you should use your GitHub pages. So whatever your account name is, .github.io, choose one of the partners to do this. As an example, you can, again, there's some strategies here. One person can have the actual GitHub repository for the for all your files, and the other person can use their live site as an example for to put it up live. Okay. Will there be marks docked if we injected images? Yes. So only text, not images, to be injected. Create a short video presentation we talked about before with a title card. That's all the same. Now, one thing to note, I'm just going to skip out of this. Hopefully that answered a lot of your questions. People have the very similar questions, which means I have to modify the Lab 1 document at some point in the future because there's a lot of questions. Let's go back to our stuff. One thing I've added in here on the course shell is additional groups. Let me talk about this a little bit. So far you've got Lab 1 groups that works with Lab 1, and you and your partners have partnered up. Again, hopefully you've done that because you cannot do your Lab 1 without being a part of a group. Even if you're a group of 1, you need to join a group. Well, what I've done is I've created a second set of groups, Lab 2 groups, and Lab 2 groups, only one person has joined right now. Lab 2 groups is another opportunity for you to join with someone, if you haven't done it for Lab 1, so let's say you worked alone on Lab 1 for whatever reason, you didn't know anybody, but now you figured out, you met people this semester and you want to work with them on Lab 2, or you have a bit of a more workload now and you figured that Lab 1 was pretty tough to work on your own and you want to work with somebody else on Lab 2, you can do that. Or you really don't like your partner from Lab 1 and you want to work on your own, or you want to work with somebody else on Lab 2, I'm giving the opportunity to switch partners, but everyone needs to resubscribe to Lab 2 groups for your Lab 2. If you don't, you won't be able to submit your Lab 2 or even see it. So please make sure after you finish doing Lab 1 or around this time, you subscribe to a new group in Lab 2. Please do that as soon as possible. Letting you know this so that you know this is just administrative stuff that I got to talk about this week because we've released Lab 2. Any other questions related to Lab 1 or Lab 2, please? You can bring them up now. I think I've answered most of them. Yeah, go ahead, Cooper.
I just have a quick one. So say like we go and get like, a layout from Bootstrap examples or something. And can we put that into the HTML and then the only thing we have to inject is the text of it? Or would we have to inject like the whole thing?
Just the text is all I'm looking for. If you want to lay out your Bootstrap so it looks nice and, kind of the layout looks okay and everything else, I'm okay. The things that are not okay is for you to get a theme, like from Theme Forest or someplace like that, right? So if you got someone else's template, like a theme, and then use that instead of the stuff we've done, that's not okay, because that's too much of someone else's code. But if it's just using Bootstrap to kind of style up the page the way you want, yeah, that's totally fine. You can use Bootstrap the entire time, no problem. Right, so hopefully that helps. Any other questions related to this, to Lab 1 or Lab 2? Images must be IT related. Well, it depends, right? If I go to Lab 1, and for Lab 1, if I look at, it says include appropriate content for your site, all right? Which means the images have to be reasonable for what we're doing. We're building a portfolio site, right? So that means, what you need to do is you need to include a background image about you and your partner. Maybe you want to make something like a logo or something else like that, or you want to get some image that's generic stock photo that is good for like a home page. That's okay. But if you're going to put in something like, your favorite video game, I mean, it doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? Keep it professional, I would say, not necessarily IT related, but professional, because this site is really about you and or your partner. Okay, that's the answer. A travel portfolio, I mean, really it's you. Okay, I see what you're saying. I mean, yeah, okay, I guess I could accept that. But remember, you're also going to put a link to your resume that's required in the About Us page. So I guess it could be a travel portfolio. But remember, you're also going to need projects. So 3 projects of your favorite project. What did you work on related to travel? There's got to be something you did. So that's why I'm saying probably IT makes sense. But, it doesn't have to be. Let's go back a couple things. Images must be IT related. And what about images? Will they be in a special folder? Well, if you think about it, if I go back to Visual Studio Code here, right, we have a content folder. But what we need most likely is an assets folder. So if you look at the requirements up here, we see how there's a content and this kind of stuff. I recommend making an assets folder, so a new folder called assets, and then inside there images. We haven't needed to do that, so that's why there is no assets folder at this time. But you would probably put it in some kind of respective folder, assets, images. Let me keep going with that stuff and answer the other questions. Is it possible to host multiple sites on GitHub pages, like one for our ICE and one for our labs? The answer is no. You can only do that if let me take that back. You can do that if you weren't private. If your ICEs weren't private, then you could do that. But because they're private, the answer is no. They have to be private in order for you to use, public, in order for you to use your GitHub pages. So that's why you only have one which is public, which is whatever your account name is, .github.io. And again, after the semester, Hamza, what you could do is if you could change it so it's all about you. Like you could be part of it's all about your stuff for you. Like chances are no one else is going to ask you to do something on GitHub pages. Let's see the GitHub examples, get Bootstrap examples on docs. Let me see what you're saying here for your carousel. And let's go into that link. This one. So you're saying you want to use this example. It's a template for Bootstrap, right? I'm okay with it. I mean, it's very basic and it has a carousel. Carousels are okay. Again, they're not the most exciting things these days, but I mean, for the most part, all you're doing is you're just adding it's just a way of quickly adding Bootstrap stuff. But I mean, there is no, custom colors or anything. That's something you have to work on your own. So yeah, this is fine. Okay. Anyone else have any questions at all? Not VirtualBox. All right, guys, that's it. Let's move on to the stuff we want to talk about. We're running a little bit behind, so I'll go a little faster with the jQuery stuff. So that was about Lab 1 and Lab 2. If you got any questions that are left over that I haven't answered, remember we still meet on Friday, so we can kind of go over anything else that I didn't cover, or if you have other doubts or questions about what you want to do. All right, let's move on to this. So what is jQuery then? We're talking about jQuery today. And really, when we think about it, jQuery we can find at jquery.com. So if we go up to jquery.com, let's go there. So here's jquery.com. This is where jQuery lives. All right, and jQuery was created back in the day, 2000. I'm going to say that a lot today. 2006 timeframe, if I'm not wrong, which is kind of before or around the same time as when Google Chrome came out with its V8 engine, right? So, I mean, you're talking about that long ago. It's quite a few years ago. It's been around in my mind forever when it comes to the web, and for web years, it's huge how long it's lasted, and that it's still alive today and not completely unsupported is amazing. Why? Because it's still a very much used library, although we don't need all of it anymore. Okay, and I'll talk about what we don't need anymore. It comes with a bunch of side projects. So, so even though jQuery is old, it's being used in thousands of websites today. Not just a few, many thousands of websites. I'm going to say I can probably safely say tens of thousands of websites still in use. Okay. That's how popular it was. And it has other sub-projects. One of them is called Jquery Ui. Again, I would have to tell you that Jquery Ui, although it's functional and supported, is not really modern anyway. Example, it presents additional UI elements through jQuery that allow you to do things like accordions. Yay! Not really that useful anymore. We don't really use accordions all that much anymore. And how to make a button. Oh, buttons can be done with Bootstrap, and so can check radio boxes, and a bunch of stuff that we couldn't do before, right, are now easily done with CSS and a CSS framework like Bootstrap or Foundation or some other CSS framework that's front end. So you don't need jQuery for this at all. So jQuery UI, although it's neat, there's some things that are neat here that you can't do with Bootstrap, but for the most part, you can do most of these things. And some of them are even not popular or even needed anymore, right? I mean, it's kind of something that was there because it filled in the gap back in the day when we couldn't do this with CSS at all, or even JavaScript. So that's what jQuery UI is. It's there, but not really required anymore. jQuery Mobile is no longer supported. It's another project that they came up based on jQuery again, a little bit background here, and it was created to support mobile development with JavaScript and front-end technologies. Nowadays, we have Flutter, we have Ionic, we have React Native, we have a lot of other hybrid technologies to create mobile applications without the need of jQuery Mobile. jQuery Mobile now has been deprecated and it's gone, and the reason for that is because there's just better stuff out there, and it's not something that was ever supported. I think beyond, I'm just going to take a guess here, probably around 2015, the same time that ECMAScript 6 came out, it's like they lost support or interest to continue working with jQuery mobile. So again, for the last 7 years or so, it's kind of been dormant. And why? Because we don't need it. There's so much else out there that does the same thing and even better than this thing did. Sizzle is it's a project that's part of jQuery. They've incorporated in there. And there's also something called QUnit that they were working on, which is a testing framework. And there's better testing frameworks, in my opinion, out there to test JavaScript. So that's, again, the main one that you really care about for us for today is, and for the semester, is jQuery by itself, this one. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what jQuery is. Let's, while we're talking, I'm going to kind of intercut between what we're doing here and code. So let's bring up, just to prepare for in-class exercise 4, which is going to be due on Friday, let's bring up our code. So I'm going to go to the desktop here again, where I have your WEBD6201 sections. And now we're at section 3. You guys are the last section for the day. And notice I have ICE3. I want to make a brand new, so this is for you to do with me, guys. I want to make a new folder called ICE4. Again, for the other sections that have already done this. This is just, again, a repeat of what you saw already. But in ICE3, I want to copy everything except for the node modules folder. So don't copy the node modules folder, but copy everything in there other than that and go back to ICE4 and paste it, please. So you'll have this. So no node modules, just everything but the node modules folder. And now what I want to do is go back to Visual Studio Code, and I want to drag and drop ICE4 in there, please. Let's do that. And when we do, what I want to change is the package.json file, so it says ICE4. That's what it should say, for sure. Please change that. And also, because you and I have a README file, it should say ICE4 if you have a README file at all. Now, you're the only section that has that, so let's change that right now. Okay, if you do have a README file for your ICE in-class exercises, please change it so it's the right one. Nice. And now what I want to do is let's get our node modules back. So again, how do I do that? I'm going to say yarn install. Okay, yarn install. We'll go out and look at the package.json file and get all the dependencies from our project, which is Font Awesome, Popper.js, Bootstrap, and jQuery. And jQuery is something we've had in our files from the very beginning. Day one, we had jQuery for the most part. So that's something. And let's take a look inside of node modules for a second. You can see that inside of node modules, right, we have, if you go in there, we have the jQuery folder. And inside the jQuery folder, we have a dist folder. And inside there, we have a couple of files for jQuery. Let's look at jQuery.min Js. It looks like, well, this, right, which is a block of code that makes absolutely no sense. That's what a minified file looks like. This file has been put through a process to minify it, compress it, and take away as much white space as possible. And the reason why this is done is to speed up its loading. That's why we use something that looks like this, right? But really, our jQuery is open source and it's clear text, and you can look at it. You can actually inspect what the jQuery library looks like by going through it and scroll through and take a look at some of the stuff that it does. Try and this is an exercise for you to do outside of today, try and look through it and try and understand what it's trying to do, right? Try and do that. And if you can understand it, because I think this is a great exercise for you to go through and say, okay, so here are a bunch of methods, each map, slice, first, last, even, and so on. So, go through all these methods as an example and try and understand what's happening here, okay? But that's what jQuery looks like. jQuery is just a library. That's all it is, okay? Let's close this, and let's push these files up on GitHub. So again, Control backtick. I'm going to navigate one level higher to the section 3, in your case, the containing folder for your in-class exercises. And I'm going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and we're going to put a message like added project files for in-class exercise 4, and then git push. Git push will push everything up up online. Okay. And there we have it. So that is our little push. And again, for those people who forgot the commands, it's git add dot. I'll put that in the chat. Git commit -m, and we'll say whatever your message is. That's the next line, and then git push. Okay, those are the three main commands we're going to use, and that is how we do it. So I've got a question: how do you get node modules in there? I use a yarn install. So try yarn install when you're in your in-class exercise 4 folder. Right now I'm in the containing folder. If I want to go back to my in-class exercise 4 folder, I can just cd to it, change directory. Okay, so that is the folder. And if I'm there and if I do a directory, you can see that I got a list of files, and one of them is node modules, and I did that by issuing a yarn install. Okay. So that is a little bit about where jQuery lives in your files, but that's not the only solution. So jQuery, again, is a library. And jQuery has a bunch of core functionality we want to use. It's a shorthand for what JavaScript gives us. So there's some different categories. One of them is selection and traversal, manipulation, so DOM manipulation and CSS manipulation, events. Now, the events that I'm going to show you in the PowerPoint document are a lot of them deprecated, and I'll talk about why they're here. Effects like animations, manipulation with Ajax, so shorthand to use Ajax, which we're going to be talking about not next week, but the week after. User interfaces, so we talked about jQuery Ui. Again, we can do more user interface, as well as extensibility. Extensibility, again, I probably wouldn't extend jQuery. I probably would make my own library. But if you wanted to make your library built on jQuery, you could totally do that as a dependency. All right, so that's something that we can do. So that is jQuery features kind of at a high level. We've made use of the node modules folder because, and there's, again, a couple of ways to get jQuery. One of them is to download it directly. That was the old way. We used NPM and Yarn. That's how we did it. But the other way is using something called a content delivery network. So the content delivery network I've mentioned before, and what it is if you look at this side as when we are in development. So this is in development, we might do this. So when we're in development mode, right, we might use something like a local folder in development. So we use local folder. And local folders are okay, right? So like node modules is what we use, right? Folder. And I will make this smaller so it fits. But more or less, this local node modules folder, right, is something that we do when we're in development. When we're kind of developing our website, we use this local folder. Why? Because a lot of times we want control. We want to switch things out. We're not sure that we've got the right files and folders and everything in state. The problem with leaving it like this when we go to our client, if we left it with node modules, right, the problem is that every time a computer accesses with their own browser our server, we're going to force them to download everything from our node modules folder. That's what we're doing, forcing them to download, which they get a fresh copy of things like jQuery and Font Awesome, Bootstrap, and anything else we give them, okay? And that's bad. Well, I mean, back in the day, it was really bad because if you think about it, it might take me 1 to 3 seconds to download each of my libraries back in the day when bandwidth was, at a premium and it was a problem to be really speedy. Nowadays, it's not so bad and it doesn't take that long. But really, why would we do it this way when there is another way when we want to kind of create our files to deploy? So in today, after we deploy things, so this is in development, but what about in production? So when the site is in production, or it's in operational mode, we don't want to use local node modules folder. Instead, we want to use the content delivery network. Use CDNs, okay? And the reason why we want to use CDNs instead is because imagine if I have a common library like jQuery at 3.6, that version, and my Bootstrap at 5.1 and my Font Awesome at 5.13 as an example, then every time, not just me, but other clients go to my site, they probably have that latest library stored in their browser. And what the Content Delivery Network says is, look, if you already have the link in your browser, because it's a link, right? Then that file is cached in your browser. So now instead of actually loading it again, getting a local copy, you can just use the copy that's in your browser cache. And obviously this is faster. And the other thing is you don't have to worry about node modules and putting up node modules on places like GitHub and all that kind of stuff. You don't need that because you can link directly to the libraries that are on your Content Delivery Network. There's several links for this. Microsoft, Google, as well as jQuery themselves for jQuery. And of course, the most popular CDN.js now is one of the most popular sites to get all CDNs for pretty much every library that's available for JavaScript. All right, so this is the way to do it. And again, servers are spread worldwide. Different data centers have this stuff. So it makes it so that people who are local, imagine that's another thing I forgot to say. If I was to do it this way, local, computers would have a very quick load time. But what about computers that are halfway around the world? They'd have to go through several hops to get to this. So then it could be 1 to 2 seconds of delay time. And guys, none of us want to wait half a second for a website to load, never mind 1 second. If we're waiting a 1 second or 2 seconds, we're like, is something wrong with that website? We've waited 2 seconds, right? But that's how we are right now. We don't want to wait. So that's why the Content Delivery Network is the way to go from a production perspective. All right, so this is pretty cool. And so jQuery, it gives us some really cool stuff. Jquery Ui is all right, like I said, but it's kind of old now. The best part of jQuery Ui and from some typical plugin functions other than jQuery Ui are data validation. So that's really good. But things like slideshows and carousels, I mean, for the most part, you can do carousels and slideshows with Bootstrap, right? You don't need jQuery Ui for that, right? So that's pretty cool. It's nice. And it's all built into, a front-end CSS framework like Bootstrap or even something like Foundation. So an alternative to Bootstrap I mentioned before is something like Foundation, right? Foundation is another front-end CSS framework that you can totally use. You don't have to use Bootstrap when you construct stuff for your clients. And there's also Material Design, which is also another way of doing stuff on the front end. Material Design allows you to create, kind of front-end frameworks with a different look and feel to it. And so there's a lot of other stuff that's out there that you can use, to format your front end. You don't have to use jQuery or even Foundation. But either way, most frameworks right now allow us to do a lot of the stuff that we can do with slideshows and carousels only with jQuery UI in the past, just with CSS and the framework itself. So that is jQuery and jQuery UI, when we would need them and what we would do with them and how we could get them and how we could link to them, right? But let's talk about the basics of jQuery programming now. So really when we talk about when it comes to jQuery, jQuery is a shorthand and it uses two methods primarily to attach or get references to objects on the page in the DOM. One of them is selector syntax and the other one is filters. So the way the selector syntax looks is something like CSS. For example, hashtag means ID, dot means class, and whatever the element is, dot, whatever the class name, that means we're saying that, hey, get an element that includes a class name of, get an element that includes an ID of and a class name of something else, both those two things. So you can do that, right? So, or I can find all elements on the page with the star, right? Those are the things that I can do. And that's similar to what we do with CSS, right? So how does it work? Well, jQuery starts off with the $. So $, whenever you see $sign in JavaScript, your mind should say, that's jQuery, okay? Because it's kind of exclusive to jQuery. Although, could you make your own library that uses the $sign? Absolutely, you could. When you say $, you're saying, hey, jQuery. Hey, jQuery. That's what I want you to think about in your mind, all right? almost like saying, hey, Google, or something else. I don't want to say the other name that my little assistant here will fire up and it'll answer, right? So, hey, Jquery, right? And then you're going to put in the selector area right here, the thing that you're looking for. Example, it could be a tag like main. It could be a ID like hashtag about us button. It could be a class like container, whatever is something that you're looking for here, right? And it's something that's related to this, the same way we select things with Emmet, the shorthand HTML format that I've been using, or with CSS. And it kind of looks like this. Oh, one more thing to notice. Whenever we call out this name, we say, hey, Jquery, okay? In your mind, I want you to say this. Hey, Jquery, get me all elements on the page that match this. Get me all elements. That's what this means. Don't get me one element or the first element. Get me all elements. That's what I'm saying when I look at this, right? So when I look at this, I'm saying, hey, Jquery, get me all paragraph elements. Hey, Jquery, get me all elements with an ID of facts. Hey, Jquery, get me all elements with a class of plus. Okay, so remember that all thing? What am I returning? A collection of HTML elements. That's what I'm getting back, a collection. I'm not getting a single instance of an element. That's an important distinction between what Jquery does for us compared to what we were doing with get element by ID. And we can also go further. We can further use specificity just like we do with CSS. And we can say, hey, Jquery, get me all paragraph elements that are inside of that contain an ID of facts. Hey, Jquery, get me all div elements that sit next to an h2 tag. Hey, Jquery, give me all UL elements that are inside of div tag. Okay. Eden says, can't you use query selector all? No, that is perfect, Eden. That's exactly what we can use. We'll talk about that as an alternative, right? So how do we call methods? So now that we have the selector, this is how we kind of hook into or get a reference to the element on the page. Then we attach a method name to do something. Now, first, hey, Jquery, get this for us. Good. Now that you got it, do something. Do this. Do this part. Okay? That's how it works. And what we do is we're using something called object chaining or method chaining. Okay, that's what we're doing here. So this is the first object. We're getting an object back, which is an array or a collection of HTML elements that match the selector syntax. And then we're going to use a method, that's the chain, a method name that's going to allow us to chain along with this one. And we can keep going. We can do another one and another one and another one. We can create a chain of methods or actions that are sequential. So first get hook, then do something else to that something, then do something else to that, those two somethings. Method chaining is really, really powerful. We're going to see how that works for us. Some typical Jquery methods that I want to mention here. Okay, some typical Jquery methods. So one of them, let's put that into place, is val. So we can get and set the value of an item, a text box. Text, get and set the value of text elements or the text content. Next, get the next sibling, right? A reference to the next sibling. Now, these ones. I want to mention anything, remember I talked about some stuff is deprecated. So now what's happened is in Jquery 3.6, at this point in time, submit and focus the way they are deprecated. These are deprecated. You need to make them kind of initialize them as events. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Okay. So let's talk about events, right, in a second. So again, some Jquery examples. I want to make a variable, oh my God, var, that it's going to store gallon, how many gallon, right? And I'm going to look at the gallon, all elements that have an ID of gallons, and I want to get the value getter, get the value for those elements and store them here. What if I have more than one? Then I'm going to store more than one. Each of the elements and their values in here in an array, right? How about this one? Hey, Jquery, get all elements with an ID of gallons and set their value to nothing. So clear all the elements like that to nothing and so on, okay? These two, again, wouldn't work this way. We're going to talk about how events work because you're triggering an event or you're triggering focus on an element. We're going to talk about how this works. And here's the event methods and how they work. It used to work like this. Hey, jQuery, target the element, and then on top of that, add an event and use an event method name like ready or click, okay? And then run a function when you hear that method triggering. But that is deprecated, and that's why I've crossed it out. Methods don't work like this anymore. You have to use something called on, right? So, hey, jQuery, access the selector, the tag into something that you find on the page, and then on that something that you found, dot on, there's the method chain. Here's the event type. On click, do this function. On ready, do this function. On focus, do this function, and so on. Okay, so that's how it works. All right, that's all methods. So if you see methods later on in this PowerPoint and it says dot ready, dot click, you have to think about them, recast them like this. Dot on, and then the method name, the event name in there. Okay, that's how it works. So why did it go this way? Because things have moved on. Remember, we don't use on click, on load anymore in JavaScript. It's considered bad form. Instead, we want to use add event listener. And this is jQuery's add event listener right here. This is how add event listener works with jQuery. Now, there's a very powerful reason to use on with jQuery. And the reason why we want to use an event listener that's tied into the jQuery selector is because, remember, the selector returns an array of objects, and on adds an event for each object that it returns. So a totally different way of doing stuff with jQuery, and I'll talk about that in a second. So here's an example of a couple of ways of waiting for the page to load, right? And you can have the long way, which was, hey, document when you're ready, right? Remember, this ready doesn't exist anymore. It's deprecated, right? So I could literally draw a line here. Go to this function and then this anonymous function, activate this anonymous function and do something. By the way, don't ever do an alert. Alerts are bad form, right? Here's the shorter way that jQuery also offers. Hey, just do this anonymous function. And this is the same as this. But I'm telling you, don't do any of these. The common way is just use an IFI, which we've done before already, and do something that looks like this. It's perfectly fine, and this doesn't save you any code at all. Not really, right? So I would recommend using this. Okay. And the same thing goes with some of these. Okay, hey jQuery, get all H2s on the page and add an event, a click event to that H2 to do something, right? And again, we wouldn't write it this way anymore. We would write, hey jQuery, get all H2s on the page on click, dot on, and then in quotations, click, do it. And that's the new way of doing stuff. So again, event handling has changed over the last couple of iterations. One thing we can also do is use something called jQuery filters. Filters are similar to selectors, and we learned about filters when we were doing CSS, so you should have. What filters allow you to do is they further add specificity to your targeting, right? When I want to target an element on the screen, right, or on the page. So here are some filters. An example is : empty, all elements with no children, including text nodes. So any empty element. That's a filter, right? Or I want to get the first element within a set of returns. So if I target some element on the page and I want to get the first element in there, I want to get that one. That's okay. The first element within the set. Or I want to get the first child of all elements, that I'm targeting. The first children of all the elements that I'm targeting. Here are some examples. Hey jQuery, give me the first child of all list items on the page. Hey jQuery, give me even table rows in tables on the page. Hey jQuery, give me the third descendant, that's what EQ2 means, of all paragraph elements with an ID of facts on the page. Hey jQuery, give me all input elements with text as the attribute on the page. That's what filters allow you to do. So filters allow you to further be more specific about how you connect and get references on the page themselves. Okay. And we have some very useful methods, like it says, next and previous allows us to traverse, the DOM. We can go to the next sibling, the previous sibling, This is awesome when it comes to targeting, because I can target kind of a part of jQuery and then take me to the next one, right? That's more difficult to do in JavaScript, right? A little bit tricky coding there. And same thing with attribute. We have the set attribute and get attribute in JavaScript. We just have attribute that does get and setting. Okay. CSS, right? Very similar to how we do, stuff in JavaScript, but we can just use CSS. Add class, remove class, adds, JavaScript, the class attribute to jQuery, an element that jQuery targets. Hide and show, super useful methods to hide and show elements on the page. And a for each function, right, where we can use to kind of loop through. I think this might be deprecated too at this point. But the rest are pretty much what looks like this. Hey, jQuery, get all H2 elements, change the CSS attribute, add a CSS style, which is color blue to all H2 elements. Okay, so very, very interesting. And the most useful event methods, again, I want you to convert these to event names. So in other words, the ready event, the unload event, the error event, the click event, the toggle event, the double click event, the mouse enter event, mouse over event, mouse out event, and hover event. Those are events, not methods anymore, because the methods have been deprecated, all these methods. To show you this, we can look up online in the jQuery API documentation. If you look at the API documentation, and if I search for on, then you can see that there are some very common events. So here's the way we can use the event handling. It goes like this. Hey, jQuery, I want you to find a table row inside of a table body, right? That's contained in a table body that's inside of, that has an ID of data table. And when I click on that, I want you to do this function. Notice also there is the $this. $this is also something very important in jQuery. And what it does is it allows you to target the element that you return. So in other words, if I'm trying to get a set of elements from this part, then $this text gets the text of those elements that I click on. Right? That's what the $this does. It's a different this. Right? It says this, it's almost like pointing to that element, the element list that I'm getting back. Okay, that's what it is. So that's what typical event handlers look like now, on and whatever the name of the event is. Okay, we can also use something called off, right? And off is another event type we can use. Off is like remove event listener, where we can add an event listener on and we can remove an event listener off. We can also do one more type, which is one, right? That's another one that we can use with jQuery. And what one does is it allows us to trigger the event one time. That's what it does. Okay, so one event, one time. Okay, so one, on, and off. Those are the ones we can use typically. Okay, and notice what we say is these are all the things that are deprecated in each one of these versions. Let's go back to version 1.1. After version 1, things started to be more and more deprecated because, guess what? We keep on adding more functionality to CSS and JavaScript. We don't need some of this stuff anymore. Okay. So that's something that we're talking about here with this stuff, with the event handling. All right, I'm just going to move on. One thing about this PowerPoint is it's a reference for a lot of other things. So we're not going to be talking about animations, so I'm going to skip by this section here. I'm going to go by to this part where it says how to use the DOM manipulation and traversal methods. How do I do them? So the big ones are val, which is value, text, which is text content, and HTML, which is the inner HTML of all the element that I'm targeting. Okay. So what we can do is if we use val, it's a getter and setter, text getter and setter, HTML getter and setter, and there's also replace with and replace all. Okay, so those are methods that are very common that we use all the time with DOM manipulation. And you can see that I want to do something like, hey, jQuery, I want you to target the aside element, all aside elements. I want you to change the inner HTML to read this. I want you to inject this. And by the way, jQuery likes to inject code just like this instead of creating elements that we do with document.create element. We don't want to do that, okay, anymore with jQuery. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is when it comes to DOM insertion and cloning and all that kind of stuff, we can use prepend, append, before and after. Those are the methods we use instead of append child and insert before or insert after. We don't want to do those. We want to use these methods when it comes to stuff. And we also have the clone method to copy something that we want to clone somewhere or we want to put somewhere else. If I want the exact same thing cloned a second time. So again, these are the very common methods: prepend, append, before, insert before, after, insert after, and clone. Okay, those are the ones we need to use. And you can see how this works. So hey jQuery, target my all aside elements on the page and append, that means at the end of this, all the aside methods, append a table of contents H2. Okay. And that's pretty much how this works. It also talks about other things in here. I'm just going to move on, though, to the most important parts. It says working with styles. Again, I want you to consider not doing this, because if you work with styles, then you are programmatically manipulating the presentation of the page. And a lot of this can be done with CSS nowadays. So please, I would say this whole part is used with caution. Okay. And then how to validate forms and data validation we're going to handle next week. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that now. And how to work with Ajax shorthand we're going to talk about during week 6. So we're going to leave these here as reference, but we're not going to talk about them here today. All right, now we've talked a lot. We did the lecture piece, but now let's get to work and let's do some examples. So I'm going to go into my scripts here. Again, I'm pulling up the in-class exercise 4 folder. This is not exactly in-class exercise 4. I'm just prepping you for what we're going to do for Friday. So let's start with some simple examples to get you guys warmed up, because you're learning almost like another subset of the language, because we're using jQuery now and not JavaScript. All right, so some questions. Let's go into my app.js and also let's bring up a light server. Here's light server. And when I launch light server, you can see that this is what it looks like, right? So when I click on the button right now, it takes me to the About Us page. Nice, nice, right? And let's also inspect the console, and we can see there's no errors, right? Cool. Here's what I want to do, right? When I look at my app.js and I'm inside of my display homepage function, right? I have a bunch of code here. And my question to you is, can you help me? I'm just going to make some, kind of enter, kind of give me some space here. I want you to help me replace this with jQuery. Let's start off. Does anyone have an idea of what I should do first? I want to replace these lines of code with jQuery. What can I do? How would it look? How would you start? Go. I know I'm saying it all at once, but I'm hoping that you guys can do something. What do you think? Scooper says, find the button. Yes. How would you do that? Give me the code, Scooper. Talk to me. I want to do it right here. What's the code that I would use to find the button? And then we'll talk about what Eden said earlier. Okay, here we go. Hamza is giving it to me. So $, remember it says, hey jQuery, right? And then I want to say hashtag, I want to find an ID, all objects with an ID of About Us button. And this right here is valid. So it finds objects, right? And we can certainly do this. We can say let About Us button equal to this. But now we got to think about just doing this alone. Do I really need to use the About Us button anywhere else? So we're kind of doing a little bit of refactoring too, right? But looking down here, there's nothing where we use the About Us button again. Let's get rid of this stuff for a second, just to make it so super clear to you how much code we have, right? So yeah, Cooper put it in afterwards as well. So again, it's this, again, About Us button, yay, right? And the answer is we don't really need to store this anymore. So this is kind of the old style up here. This is the old code, right? So old code, right? And let's just comment this out, right? And so far we got reference to this thing. And now I want to add an event listener, which is the click event. How do I add that method onto this one? What do I do next? What's the next piece? I'm going to returning all elements of that match the About Us button, type. What do I do next? What do I put back here? I know it's kind of apparent to some of you, and people that are watching online might be like, just do this, right? But it should be something that you should be able to get right now from the conversation we've just had. So what do I do next? So we do, how about this? Let me ask the people that are here. I'm going to start with, instead of always hitting up with Cooper or whatever, let's look at Ivan. Ivan, let's see if you can come on the mic. Tell me what I do next, Ivan. I know I don't want to pick on you, but you're here, Ivan, and I like you, and I want to see if you can give me the answer. What's your answer, Ivan? What do I do next? Okay, it's okay. You don't have to be sure. Here's what I'm going to give you. Yes, Cooper, you're right. .on, that's the next part. On is the event that I want to use. .on, and then the event name, which would be click. And then you can do the following. You can call an anonymous function, right, that does something. And we can actually put in the local location href in here like we did before in here. Now, is the effect the exact same as this? Let's see. So save, and I go back, and I press this, and yay, we're good, right? The effect is the same. Question though, is this exactly the same as this in terms of footprint? So memory footprint, and in terms of what it's actually doing, is it the exact same? It's a yes or no for this one.
No.
On yours says no, thank you. And Cooper said no too. Why is it no? Because here's what's really happening. I'm saying this is the jQuery way, right? So get all elements that include, that have, or we'll say with an ID of About Us button, all elements, right? And then, and for each element, add a click event. That's what that line means, right? That's what that line means, okay? Think about what I'm doing. This is killing a bug with a sledgehammer, all elements, okay? It's only 3 lines of code though, okay? So that's so far. What about another way of doing that? That's not what I wanted. What about another way of doing that, right? For this, how else can I do this? How else can I code this? Well, this is the jQuery way and it works. Okay, that's fine. But can we do something like that with JavaScript? Is there a JavaScript equivalent? There is. It looks like this. Document dot query selector all. That's what Eden said earlier. Query selector all, right? And then select the an ID of About Us button. Okay, cool. Can I do add event listener? Would this work in JavaScript? What do you think? Would this work? Don't try it. Just tell me if it'll work or not. Can I do something that looks like this? Is it possible to do this exact thing that I've done here? Is it possible? And yours says, I think so. I'm not storing it as a variable. No, I don't have to, Cooper, right? So can I do this? Can I, do something like this? What am I doing What am I doing here? I'm saying get all elements that match the ID of About Us button, similar to what I did here. This part is almost the same as this part right here, okay? But this part is not the same as this part. And this, my friends, will fail like this when it's written like this. Let me show you. If I go back, because it says add event listener is not a function on my query selector all. It doesn't compute, right? What I need to do to make this work is a lot more code than this. I'd have to use a for each, right? For each Let's do that. And for each, instead of click, I'm going to say that for each element, right? For each element in this, that the query selector returns, then I need to say elements dot add event listener, click, and then do this function. Then do this function here. And now we're the same. Now we're the same. Now this will work. It's an additional 2 lines of code and another function to call, another function call. But if I run it now, you can see that clearly it works. Okay. Now, again, in terms of code and the value of what I'm doing here, I mean, it's like I can do it in parts. Cooper, you asked me some questions like, hey, can I do something like, about us button, and then do something like document.getElementById, or, query selector all, which is what we did, query selector all about us button, right? And then after this, could I not just do something that looks like this? Yes, you could, like we've done before. This is the first element, and you can see that about us button works. And I can do an add event listener on top of this. Totally usable, totally fine. A little bit weird because of this. Okay, I don't like that, and I didn't like it when we did it back here. Okay, but we don't have to do this because I could do method chaining even on JavaScript. So I can do this and then dot add event listener. That's totally fine. We can do that event chaining, and that works great. The other thing that is that I can do is get the query selector and then do a for each loop. I can store it inside of a variable and do something like for each. And notice that whatever that variable is called, I can call the for each method, and then it has this syntax, which is the fat arrow syntax, which means I can probably shorten this thing, which I can, right, to fat arrow syntax. So let's do it the right way, which looks like this. And there's a difference between this and function, and I'll talk about it. And you can also do this fat arrow syntax here, right? So that's something that we can shorten, but then we can do it here too. Just to be fair, let's do it up here where we had our jQuery, just to do a shortened version. And here as well with the stuff that we did previous. Okay, this shortcut, fat arrow syntax, cuts out the need for us to put function in there, but it's different than using a function. It's different because the context, the scope for the lexical this, the this keyword, now is up to here. That's the this scope when I use fat arrow syntax. Careful about this. You may get weird effects, when I use the this keyword, okay? Not in jQuery, I'm talking about just generally, if I use fat arrow syntax, but it is a nice little shorthand. Okay, so again, if I press save and I go back out and I click on the button, we're good to go. That works. How about further than that? What about if I wanted to do it a different way? So this is the JavaScript way, JavaScript. And what this says is, hey, get all elements with an ID of about us button. That's the first thing. And for each element, loop. That's what it does. That's what this first part means, loop, right? And then inside here, I'm saying, okay, for each element, add an event listener or a click event. Yeah, that's what I'm doing here. Add a click event. So this is different than this and different than this, okay? Let's comment this out and go to another one. What about if I did something that looked like this? Document.query selector by itself. And I did something like hashtag about us button. This is like doing query selector all with a square bracket 0, right? But without doing it, it looks nice. Look at that. So I'm targeting only one element, all right? And I'm saying now I can do add event listener, all of this. which is something that looks like this without the comment tab, right? Like this. That is also very viable, right? And, right, it's nice because, again, only a few lines of code, right? I mean, just to be fair, I could put that there for Jquery, and I can put that here for this method in terms of number of lines of code, you know, just to see the difference. Because I would probably format it this way if I was doing it, right? So you see the length. So here's what this looks like. But, I mean, what's the difference between this one and this one? Well, this is the JavaScript way. Okay, so native JavaScript again. But this says get an element that matches an ID of about us button. Get an element, a single element, right? And then add a click event, right, to that element. That's what this does. So it's kind of a one step which does this part. Okay. Okay, let's talk about memory footprint now before we move on. So memory footprint wise, this right here is number one is the fattest memory footprint. Why is that? Because Jquery is a whole library. So whenever we activate Jquery with a $sign, we're saying, hey Jquery, and that means get the entire library. And for this part right here, it could be 40 or 50 lines of code. All right, for 3 lines or 4 lines. Here, it's what you see is what you get, right? But again, this part is getting all elements, and so is this one. So this would be second fattest. So this is second fattest because we are returning, or it returns because it returns a collection of elements like this one, right? Because. All right, so that's what number 2 is. Number 3 is leaner. All right, so this is pretty lean, right? Pretty lean, right? Because it only returns a single element, but it does do a query, which is considered a little fatter. You know, as an example, let's see if it works. You can see that that works nicely. It's a little fatter than the slimmest way, which is just to use the document.getElementById, which targets the same exact way. You can do the same exact thing on the back end. And this would be the slimmest, right? Leanest, I would say. Leanest. Wow, okay. So in terms of how it would work. Make sense? So again, just to prove that that works, and I don't need to use a variable name, right? Oops. Then if I save this and go like this and click the button, then I'm good to go. Okay. But we care today about Jquery. So we're going to uncheck this one, right? And talk about why this is good, actually, right? So the cons are it's a heavy memory footprint if you only use it once, right? But once I start using Jquery in my code, I pay for it only one time. So I've loaded the library, I've got the library. So really here it's 3 lines of code. Is it a little bit slower? Yes, because I'm using a query, and it's better to use a native JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript like this. But this is also not great because I'm selecting multiple objects. So this would be probably the leanest and most appropriate for what I'm doing up here. Okay, but let's just use Jquery because we're learning. Let's put this up on GitHub. So I'll say something like, again, this is just for learning, not for your in-class exercise. So it's going to be git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say added Jquery examples. Okay, I don't understand either. And then git push. Not sure why it did that either. Okay, makes sense. Now let's do another exercise for today. What I want to do is take a look at all this code and just determine together first of all, is there something I can remove? And is there some way of making this code leaner? Let's start with main content. First of all, am I ever doing main content more than once? The answer is no, I'm only doing it one time. So really, theoretically, we could probably get rid of this, right? And we could probably do this in one, like so. I could say something like, let's comment this out and add a new line so we can keep the old code. So give you a sense of what this looks like. And just to I'll put it at the bottom, right? So you can see it. I'll put it here. So I'll say, hey, jQuery, I want to target the main element and I want to append the main paragraph in there. So I've just commented out this one and I've added this one piece of code. I've modified this code to this and it does the exact same thing. So if I save it and go back, you can see that main paragraph is there. Hey, save the line, right? Okay. Okay, but what about this document part? Document body is like document.body. If anything, this is kind of an alias for what we're doing down here. Now we can't do document.body.append. If I tried that, if I said document.body.append append child, right? And if I did that and first went there, then that works. Document.body.append child works, right? I could do this. Or I could just use jQuery and I could do something like body append. Both are good. And that means I don't need the document body. So let's get rid of that. Goodbye. Right? So another line saved. Cool. Now, what about main paragraph? How do I create an element? Remember, in jQuery, we don't create an element. In fact, what it wants you to do is something like this. Let's replace main paragraph, this line here, with actually some template string. And the template string would look something that looks like this. So let's add a paragraph tag. We want to add an ID of main paragraph, right? And we want to add a class of margin top 3, right? And inside the main paragraph, we're going to say this is the main paragraph. Okay, and this right here will do the same thing as, we don't need this piece, we don't need this one, we don't need this one, we don't need this one. So we've lost all those lines of code. Let's check it out and see if it works, and we're still good. And the last one is the article. We can do the same thing with the article. So let's just preemptively get rid of it. And all we need is 2 lines of code, and the line can look like, let's add an article with the class of container, right? And inside that article, right in here, I can put in all that stuff, the article paragraph, which is something that I already have here. And that's it. So from all of this code, right, I only need these lines of code, 2 lines of code to replace all this, right? And this replaces all of this, because that's what we did. That was what our mission was, to replace 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code with realistically 4 lines of code, right? To make it a little bit sharper, right? We are binding things together with object chaining, right? And really, we don't have very much code in here at all. So let's save and say something like replaced, git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say replaced JavaScript with jQuery in display home page function. It's a bit of a longer update, but git push. Questions about what we did today? What are your thoughts? Right? Do you understand what we did? How we did this? Append, really, we're using template strings. And now this is the preferred method because we have template strings. We don't have to do all of this creation, then modification and stuff. Could we do it when we need to? Absolutely. We can totally do this still, right? you know, we can even do it after. We can always make the template string first, create an element with the template string. We can do this kind of thing, modify it, and then append it. We can do anything we want. But if we're only doing hard-coded stuff like this, well, then we might as well go directly in. No variable required, right? Because remember, what's happening is I'm returning a value here and immediately acting upon it with the next piece. So I'm saying, hey, get a reference, and from that reference, now add this method. And we can do the same thing with JavaScript. Hey, document, get element by ID, return that element that we're looking for, and now add an event listener to that to the results. We can do that. That's part of JavaScript, not jQuery. Questions around this at all, guys, before we go for the day? So neat, right? I think it's pretty cool what we can do. It's going to get some getting used to. Some people said that earlier today as well. One thing to note is if I hover over, I get some really good code hinting from the methods. So jQuery has some great code hinting built in to Visual Studio Code. We can do better. We can add some assistance to this as well. But for the most part, it's really, really good. I know, right? No, don't use this for lab 1. Just use regular JavaScript, please, right? So you'll have a whole lab 2 to do it, Cooper. Right, so try and use JavaScript alone with your first lab 1, and use jQuery in lab 2 and beyond. Okay. Yeah, so again, what this is doing is it's showing you an alternate way. Now, I also have to tell you disadvantage this method. Okay, I got to talk about this a little bit too, to be fair, right? One, we need a library, you know, quite a big library. Actually, if you look at the, the jQuery library right now, and if I look at the dist jQuery file, and I go down and just count the number of lines here, we're talking about a library that's 10,000 lines of code. Okay, that's what we need. 10,000 lines of code to do something we can do that's built into, into JavaScript itself. This is built in. Okay, so there's nothing for us to do here, number one, right? So that's something that we have to consider. Two, this is not contextual. When you look at this from the very first moment, you're like, what the heck does $sign mean? It doesn't make any sense, right? To the average person who's never seen this, it looks like, again, spaghetti, which is what we want to avoid. Okay, so I don't want to use spaghetti unless I have to, right? And here we're looking at it and we're like, wait, what? What is this thing? We don't care about this. This doesn't make any sense, okay? And whereas something that looks like this, hey, document, get my element by ID, or hey, document, I want to use my query selector to select the About Us button ID, add an event listener to the thing we get back. Even this is a little cryptic, but I think it's less cryptic than this. This is pretty cryptic when you don't know what this is doing, all right? I mean, I know that append means this is kind of neat because it shows you what we're adding, right? But what the heck does this mean? Well, this is a target. We're targeting main, and then we're appending something to it. That's what this means. We're targeting the body tag, and we're appending something to it. Okay. I know, PHP. Any questions at all before we stop for the day? All right, so that's it for me today. So on Friday, when we get together, again, well, we have a lot of work to do. What I want to do on Friday is complete the stuff that we talked about in the contact list. In the contact list, we talked about adding in an edit button and a delete button, as well as an add button that's making this add button work. Okay, so this add button is something that I want to make work. We're also going to add in an edit.html page. That's coming, edit.html, as well as some additional functionality. I want full CRUD, create, read, update, and delete for our contact class by Friday, right? That's what we want to do. And that's a lot of work to get done in 2 hours. So again, we're in person. There's going to be a little bit of setup and takedown. So we're going to have very little time for the last recording, which is going to happen between 4 and 6 p.m. on Friday. I may run a little long just to make sure you have everything you need for your in-class exercise. Okay, just letting you know. I will be definitely doing both Zoom and YouTube for the last class, but Zoom every single time. Okay, so that way if you can't make it, I'll be there. Questions before we go? I'll stop recording now on YouTube.